Chapter 10, 1972, The Unsurpassed Dharma Land of Enlightenment. The Lamas went down to Bodh Gaya with Anne, Massimo, and Carol to take Gyabje Ling Rinpoche's teachings on Tsongkhapa's great treatise. With few other Westerners around, the Coronas were given front row seats and were amused to see young tulkus flicking rubber bands at each other during the teachings. Massimo was becoming increasingly devoted to Lama Yeshe. The Coronas were now living at Ram's house near Kopan, on the backside of the hill, besides Laxman's house where Robbie and Rhonda had lived for almost a year. One night their baby daughter, Maitri Dolma, would not stop crying. Desperate, Massimo and Carol took her to Lama. He looked at her for a few moments, then reached over and pulled out a thorn lodged in the back of her knee. She stopped crying immediately, said Massimo. I loved being around Lama. I loved the sweet smell that just flowed from him. Lama gave both Massimo and Carol the Bodhisattva vows with a short puja and dedication, at the end of which Massimo urged him to eat some of the mountain of offerings they had brought him. He took only one cashew nut, murmuring, "It's too much, dear, too much." Building Kopan. Now it was winter. The track that passed for a road up to Kopan was dry, so supplies could get through, and it was time to start building Kopan's Gompa. Owa made a beautiful little architectural model of the proposed design. Monks from the newly re-established Gyuto Tantric College in Dalhousie happened to be in Bodhanath to bless the stupa, which had been under repair for many years after having been struck by lightning. Lama requested them to come and bless Kopan. The monks came up and sat around the hill, smiling at Owa's little model. They had never seen anything like it before. Together with Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa, they performed a solemn puja, harmonic multiphonic single-voice chords echoing around the valley as they called on all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Dharma protectors, and landlord spirits to bless the hill and the building to be erected there. Lama Yeshe told his students that every place has its own specific landlord spirits. The Gompa at Kopan was given the name Ogmin Jongju Chirling, which means unsurpassed Dharma land of enlightenment. Afterward, Anne asked Lama what he had prayed for during the puja. I prayed that if this Gompa is going to be really beneficial and benefit countless beings, then may it be built right away without any obstructions, because I don't have much time and I don't want to waste my life. But things look good. During such pujas, we look for auspicious signs. Did you see the two horses galloping up the hill during the puja? One of them was white. That is a very auspicious sign. Construction began with Lama Yeshe taking the role of foreman. He supervised everything. His students had donated the funds to build this Gompa, and he wasn't going to waste one penny. Max spent every spare moment of her time purchasing building materials and ferrying them up the hill. The Nepalese contractors left everything at the bottom of the hill, refusing even to attempt the terrible Kopan road. Fortunately, Max had recently bought a small jeep through a contact at the King's Palace. At this point, Zena no longer had any money of her own, and Max was undeniably the first great benefactor of the Lamas and Kopan. For the next 12 years she gave and gave, and there's no doubt that without her, Copan could not have become what it did. Steve's Tower. An American student, Steve Molaski, now Pearl, returned to Copan with some money he had received from a health insurance payout. He wanted to use it to build a Tibetan tower at one end of the Copan land. Lama Yeshe approved the plan and the design and gave him permission to go ahead and build his fantasy. First of all, I had to find enough rock, said Steve. One day Lama Zopa came over, pointed to a particular spot, and said, "Dig there." The Nepalese crew I'd hired dug down and found this immense granite boulder. When cut and chiseled, it provided just enough blocks for the tower walls. Steve had first met Lama Yeshe some months before in Kathmandu when he was house-sitting the Swayambhu flat of an artist. He had invited Lama to a late dinner and taken him to a cheap Swayambhu restaurant. At the time, I didn't know anything about who this person was. I just liked him a great deal, recalled Steve later. When dinner was over, it was quite late at night, and since there was no transportation back to Boda at night, no taxis or minibuses, Steve suggested that Lama pass the night at the flat where he was staying. This accommodation was quite sparse. Apart from the couch where Steve ordinarily slept, there was just an old car seat from a van that had been brought into the flat so visitors could sit on it. Steve offered the car seat to Lama, and this is where, wrapped up in his Zen, he spent the entire night. Lama gave me a hard time about that incident for many years, Steve said. Tibetans were now able to pronounce Steve's name correctly, so at Copan he was always called Estep. Steve then went traveling, returning to Kathmandu with hepatitis. Lama Yeshe had recommended a Tibetan doctor who quickly cured him. Tibetan medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, from which Tibetan medicine is partly derived, are both particularly effective in the treatment of hepatitis and other liver ailments. Soon afterwards, Steve began to realize something of Lama Yeshe's power. When he was giving me directions on how to go to the doctor, he held up his hand. I was into palmistry in those days, and I noticed a rare line that indicated intuition. When he realized I had noticed this, he dropped his hand and grinned at me. When I recovered, I knew I should go and thank him for the help he had given me, but I held off because I knew that if I saw him again, my life would change. Steve continued. Sometime later, I was selling woodblock prints. I heard that Lama Yeshe wanted some, so I took a taxi to Max's house that evening. She put me in his room to wait for him. I watched a wonderful sunset from the picture window, then sat in the dark, meditating. Next thing, I heard, "What can I do for you?" I thanked him for fixing my body and said I was wondering what he could do for my mind. He didn't answer. We just sat there in complete silence in the dark while I felt this incredible warm glow seep through me. I was just blown away. 2 small brick huts were also built at Copan. One for Max, and Oa moved into the other, which later became known as Anne's house. The Gompa itself included rooms for the lamas. Then there was Estep's tower. Lama never stopped teasing me about that tower. It ended up costing more than the Gompa, said Steve. Lama Yeshe's next project was a little row of retreat rooms, which came to be called the Sangha House. While these were in the planning stage, Anne asked Lama how big they should be. He lay down on the ground, indicating that she should draw a line, one at the top of his head and another at the soles of his feet. That was enough room for anybody, he said. Lama Yeshe was not a tall man. Finally, a two-stall, Indian-style toilet was constructed next to the retreat rooms and painted white. Oa carefully painted Sam and Sarah over the doors, an Inji play on samsara, the Sanskrit term for suffering existence, and the cause of many smiles among Kopan's Western visitors over the years. The second Kopan meditation course. Word spread that Lama Zopa was about to give a second meditation course in March. More students arrived at Kopan, among them Peter Kedge, an engineer from the Rolls-Royce Aeronautical Division. Peter Kedge says, "With fellow engineers Harvey Horrocks and Philip Elliott, I had spent 6 months driving a Land Rover from Britain to Nepal, with many adventures on the way. One morning in Afghanistan, after setting up camp in complete darkness, we awoke to find that we had stopped right in front of the huge Buddha statues carved into the cliffs at Bamiyan, the same statues that were destroyed by the Taliban in 2001. Contact with Tibetans from one of the refugee camps in Pokhara awoke my interest in spirituality, and some friends introduced us to what became for a time my personal Bible, Ram Dass's Be Here Now. One night, on a trek in the Solukhumbu Everest region, I sat freezing in a cold Sherpa lodge and by candlelight tried a practice someone had told me to try. This was to visualize Guru Rinpoche, which at the time I mispronounced as Rimpoche, sitting in a lotus in the middle of a lake, and basically inhale white light and exhale all physical and mental negativities in the form of black fog. It seemed really strange. After 10 days in that area, where everywhere one looks, there are prayer flags, mani stones, monasteries, and ascetics' caves, we returned to Kathmandu and heard about a meditation course in English and a Canadian nun at this place called Kopan. One of the guys I was with and I decided to go there, while Harvey went to Australia and Phil went back to England. We arrived on the first day of the course just in time for 30 minutes of full-length prostrations led by Anila Ann. We threw ourselves on the floor in front of a huge applique tanka of Buddha Avalokiteshvara, the one with 1,000 arms, all amid billowing clouds of incense smoke. There were about a dozen people there. When I saw them assembled at the first breakfast, I remember thinking that compared with my colleague and me, who were pretty conservative at that time, they looked like very seasoned travelers in their Indian, Nepalese, and Afghan clothes, long braided hair, beards, and so forth. I do remember feeling at the time that I didn't belong there, but that feeling changed. The ground floor of the new Gompa was completed just before the course began, which was held in the old Gompa, part of the original house. Lama Yeshe stayed at Kopan this time, keeping one eye on the construction team and the other on the meditators. Losong Nyima ran the kitchen, and Anila Ann rushed about, typing up the most recent text translations on an ancient typewriter someone had found in Kathmandu, checking up on the builders, and attending Rinpoche's lectures. Besides Peter, others attending the course included Massimo and Carol Corona, Oa, Steve Molaski, Canadian Mark Shainman, Englishman Harry Luke, and a young American woman called Lolly Smith, who had been trekking with Peter and Harvey. Chris Kolb had permission to attend only the morning sessions, as Lisa had just had a baby boy whom they named Thor. There was also another young American man, Ron Brooks, who wore his hair tied up in a bun on top, which he covered with a small cloth like a Sikh. He later took ordination from Trulsik Rinpoche and became known by his ordination name, Ngawang Kedro. Others attended occasionally, such as an austere French girl called Dominique, who Max sponsored. Dominique spent a lot of time in retreat up at Nagi Gompa, Urgen Tulku's small monastery located on Mount Shivapuri, behind Kopan. Lisa Lata came to the teaching several times, and Zena came for just one afternoon. I turned around in the Gompa to see who had come in late and made brief eye contact with Zena, said Peter Kidge. My impression was, this was someone very heavy. On March 14th, Lama Yeshe wrote to Robbie and Rhonda Solik. For the last 2 months I have given no lessons and have been a construction lama. Every day I get up at 7 o'clock and work with the Nepalese to build a center for my Golden Flower students. All day I supervise the workers until 6 o'clock. Then I retreat and work on books until bedtime. Now we have just about finished the Gompa, and we have finished 9 small retreat houses and the outhouse. Soon, at the halfway of April, Zopa and I will go to the Gompa and open it to the students, and after 2 weeks I will continue my teachings. Now, Zopa is giving a month-long meditation course to about 20 students. It will end at the end of March. I am so glad you are continually taking teachings with lamas, putting your mind into the true path. Dharma is most truthful, more than external development. Lord Buddha shows unlimited method by unlimited sentient mind. So I also pray for you to realize in a most psychic true nature your own psychic. Give my regards and true love to my daughter Losong Cherki. That's Jan Willis's refuge name. I am now Swiss banking Lama. I have a bank account in Geneva, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama suggested to Thupten Zopa's Rinpoche. Don't worry about my health. Limited knowledge of doctors cannot give right prediction on this subject. Anyway, I don't believe, as they say. I would like to come to America, but only if I can be of benefit to mother sentient beings. If an arrangement with an ashram or a center could be made, so I could lecture, or a lecture tour of universities could be made, it would be very good. Anyway, we have lots of time to speak again about this subject. Slowly, slowly. Zopa Rinpoche added a typically self-deprecating note. I am so sorry for my long silence because I have been sleeping all the time, so I did not want to make a mistake or write dreams. Zopa Rinpoche's teaching style demanded patience. Rinpoche's vocabulary was still quite limited, and he coughed and repeated himself interminably. Massimo could follow better than most, because he had spent time with Rinpoche before the course, helping him put together a 30-page booklet in English. This did not prevent him from occasionally viewing Rinpoche with some skepticism. In an aside during one session, Massimo mumbled, "What does he know?" Rinpoche looked straight at Massimo and said, "Because I have realized these teachings." No one had ever heard him say anything so direct before about his spiritual accomplishments, and, according to common knowledge, he has never been heard to repeat anything like it ever again. Peter Kedge says, "We were given 2 or 3 mimeograph sheets with information on them. I just couldn't understand why this young monk, Zopa as we called him, would close his eyes and talk through the first ringing of the lunch bell, the second ringing of the lunch bell, the third ringing of the lunch bell, until it seemed we'd get no lunch at all. To me, we had the information on these sheets. It was time for lunch, and that was it." On one occasion, I was leaning back against the wall of the Gompa and really getting very annoyed and feeling quite rebellious, having heard the lunch bell call us for at least the third time. Then Zopa opened his eyes and, looking directly at me, asked if I had been the one to make the altar and put the flower offering there that morning. And yes, it had been me. It was my turn on the roster. I suddenly realized that Zopa wasn't just a monk, but someone extraordinary, with insights I had never experienced. Over the next few days, I came to realize this was a person who lived what he was explaining 100%. It came as a shock to realize that actually I was sitting in front of a modern-day saint. I had always thought of saints as an extinct species. Spending time with Zopa like this, and later with Lama Yeshe, made me realize that saints really exist. During this meditation course, the focus had been on Lama Zopa, and for a long time, Peter wasn't aware that there was another Lama on the hill. One day, during the lunch break, I was sunbathing on the steps leading to one of the rooms in the old house, Peter recalled. A monk came out and said, "Excuse me," as he needed to pass. I said sure and moved a little bit. He said, "Thank you so much." I couldn't imagine why he was really thanking me, but he beamed and I felt a radiance from him. That was Lama Yeshe. A few days later, Anila Ann, who was in many ways my mentor during and after that course, said to me, "You have to have a meeting with Lama Yeshe. You know, Lama Yeshe is the guru here. Lama Zopa is Lama Yeshe's disciple." And so the first pieces were beginning to fall into place. During the course I heard talk of another nun, an American, but I hadn't seen one. I just knew that every evening a blue Volkswagen Beetle came up the hill, and a black American woman, often wearing a purple trouser suit, would get out, and her name was Max. I soon learned that Max was the American nun, and that it was her American International School salary that went 100% to supporting the lamas and the school. Lama Zopa had recently started in order to provide Sherpa children with a traditional monastic education. The planned month-long course lasted only 10 days. Suddenly, Lama Zopa announced that Geshe Rabten had sent a telegram. He and Lama Yeshe were to go to Dharamsala immediately for a teaching by Gyabje Trijang Rinpoche on the 6 yogas of Naropa. Half an hour later, the lamas left in a taxi, and it was up to the 2 ordained people on the hill, Anila Ann and Jampa Zangpo, to keep things going. "But that's how it is with the lamas," said Ann. "You never knew what was going to happen next. Once I thought I'd write a book called Life with Lama, but it took me 3 days just to write down what happened in 1 day, so I gave up." The day after the lamas left, a film crew from the American television news magazine 60 Minutes showed up. They were doing a feature on American hippies' favorite overseas haunts, and Kathmandu was naturally at the top of the list. The director was keen to get people who were wearing monk's robes on film. They wanted us to prostrate to the sun on top of the hill and a whole lot of other ridiculous things, so we decided not to go along with them at all, said Ann. I told the reporter he might like to ask the Dalai Lama some questions instead of looking up for sensational extremes. Zina lives for retreat in the mountain. Zina was becoming increasingly worried about her visa and other practicalities as she prepared to go into a long retreat. Anne offered to take over the day-to-day running of Copan and offered Zina the use of her tower room at the Rana house, but that was never going to work as there were too many distractions. Trulsik Rinpoche, whom Zina had met on several occasions, gave permission for her to come to his monastery, Tupten Chirling, in the lower Solu region of the Solukhumbu, near Jumbesi. His monastery was home to both monks and nuns. Zina began preparing for her departure and now spent most of her time with Harriet and Ria in Kathmandu. Max began to spend time at Copan. Soon it was time for Zina to leave. Ria was safe with Harriet, who had just enough servants to keep her happy. She also had the company of her sister Louise. Lama Yeshe lunched with them at least once a week. Zina had already done several short retreats, including 3 months in a house in Boda, returning to Copan each time radiantly beautiful and very happy. However, within 2 weeks of completing her retreats, she was screaming and yelling and had everything in the kitchen rearranged twice. Nevertheless, she was a serious student and had several interviews with Trulsik Rinpoche, who recognized her qualities and gave her permission to do the longed-for retreat at his monastery. Zina knew life in the mountain would be hard, and there were no room for dilettantes at Tupten Chirling. She was rather nervous. "It's so frightening what's happening to me now, you know. I'm going both ways at once." She knew she needed to calm right down and integrate the teaching she had received. Zina went up to Jumbesi just before the monsoon began. She left with blessings from Geshe Tupten Tashi, as the lamas were in Dharamsala again. Arrangements were made for Anne to collect Zina's monthly stipend from Conrad Rooks for her. After a week in the pure silent mountains, Zina wrote to Lama Yeshe. "O my beloved Lama, do not be angry with me for taking this precious time to be with you on paper. From my hole in the ground, where I can hardly stand up straight, I cannot help thinking of those who suffer. Aunt Louise, who is afflicted with 2 of the worst sorrows on earth, separation and death. She will not admit it, but one knows. Please, Lamala, help her. I can do nothing now, and maybe later will be too late. Help her find a little more peace before she turns the wheel. Only 5 days have passed since I arrived at the top of this golden mountain, and so much mist has cleared. Can so much clear in such a short space of time? Each day I manage to meditate for 2 hours before lunch, undisturbed and completely still after my prayers, and 5 hours in the Gompa in the afternoon, 2 of them completely centered, or as center as that center is for the moment. I have suddenly and quite clearly realized what we are heading for, the gaining of a consciousness which shall not be broken, over which death shall have no power, a consciousness that is continuous and unbroken, a self-consciousness gained and never again lost or clouded. But yet I am only at the threshold. But I seem to have been traveling from such a great distance, Lamaji. Leagues away I seem to have come, and still have so far to go. But now I am conscious of the 4 great initiations that open the doors to the Palace of No Return. I am only at the entrance to the 2nd initiation. I prostrate myself to you and the 3 jewels, most honorable and wise one. Suddenly I see more clearly these around me, measure more accurately the distance that separates. In this light I look upon the great hierarchy of beings who are in Shambhala. I see how far I am, how measureless my ignorance in the light of your perfect knowledge. The task that remains is so gigantic. But, dearest Lama, were it not for you and the host of Lamas, I could not see my faults and how to surmount them. I pray, I meditate on the three jewels to help me conquer all evils of irritation. Never to be irritated by the faults of others, or to be thrown off balance by the common events of everyday life. To have harnessed my temper, to have it completely under control. Never again to feel anger rather than compassion if someone injures me. All my irritations and impatience will be replaced by an abundance of patience and tolerance. Tolerance in the sense of not forgetting the weakness one has conquered. Lama Geshe-la, may this all be so, said and done, acted out through body, speech, and mind. Otherwise, words will not be pearls but stones, mere intellectualism rather than realization. My body, speech, and mind I offer to you. How I love you all so deeply, great beings of heaven. Signed, Palmo. Lama Yeshe kept that letter all his life. A month later he wrote back to her on local rice paper decorated with Christian motifs and Bible quotes. Tuesday, 6 June, 1972. Dear Holy Mother Palmo, I am so glad you have gone to the Himalayas to retreat in isolation mentally and physically. I want you very much to retreat into the yogic method of Vajrasattva and do the mantra again 100,000 times, which is the right condition for now. Please sit always in the same place until finished completely. Do not communicate with foreigners about any samsaric experience and actualize the true path beyond words. Westerners think knowing words is education, but words are nothing. I have so many good thoughts about your Dharma life, and I think of you always. Never come down from the transcendental vision and divine oneness of Vajrasattva. In the dualistic view of ignorance there is no lasting enjoyment. You always have absolute true Guru within you, within your consciousness, so he can teach you and show you the true path always. I have something I want to tell you very much for your meditation retreat, but it is too difficult for words to convey. After the retreat is successful, perhaps another retreat can be made at Dharamsala around so many holy gurus. I am always with you. When I came back from Dharamsala, I saw your mother and daughter, and everything is perfect. There is no problem. Continuously I watching them, and I got your message. If impermanence allows, I will bring Rhea to the mountains as you asked. Please don't possess Rhea too much in your ego's mind. My health is very good. Please don't worry. Perhaps I am going to Dharamsala again during monsoon time. I am awaiting some information. If not, I am going to retreat here. With true love, love from your Lama Yeshe. Please relax as you work hard. If any problem comes, please let us know if we can help. Also, many people are doing retreat, so you are not alone. Thupten Yeshe. Anne McNeil supervises construction and does retreat. Anila Ann took over supervision of the Kopan building site. When the Lamas returned from Dharamsala, she went down to Kathmandu to do the banking, a day's work on its own. I asked Lama Yeshe if he'd keep track of the workers' hours for me that day so I knew what to pay them, she said. They were all paid daily because they were very poor and we never knew exactly how many workers we would need each day. That night, when I asked Lama for the pay book, I saw he'd only put down 2 figures, and the rest was just scribble. Well, this just blew my mind. How was I going to pay these people? Don't worry, said Lama. I'll work it out with them tomorrow. But I was upset and said that even the Buddha would have kept track. It was the worst thing I could think of saying. With that, I marched off to my room. 20 minutes later, there was a tap on the door. It was Lama with a glass of lemonade. Anne then went into retreat, during which she grew very miserable and lost her appetite. Not a safe thing to do in Nepal under any circumstances, but especially because she was already extremely lean. But in the mind that arises in retreat is not always blissful and may focus on precisely the mental habit most painful to the ego, such as jealousy or anger. Lama Yeshe began eating a supper with her, treating her as if she were a toddler. He made excited noises about how delicious the food was and tried to tempt her to take a few spoonfuls. I was finally able to see how belligerent I'd become and was able to unhook that feeling and get my appetite back, she said. Toward the end of her retreat, Lama Yeshe was due to return to Dharamsala, but first he gave Anne a Vajrasattva tanka he had commissioned for her. We stood there looking at it together, and I noticed he was beaming again, that unearthly golden glow that sometimes emanated from him. I looked back at the tanka, then at him again. Each time he looked even more radiant and so shiny. I just stared and stared. He was always so subtle with me. During that business at the Kathmandu airport with the hand-painted text, I developed what I can only call later a very hot ear. It went blazing red for a while and felt so hot. That experience came to herald some form of communication from Lama Yeshe. I'd get a hot ear at 2 a.m. and think, Lama wants something. I'd go to his room, and he was never surprised to see me. It was always, oh yes, Anila, I have something for you to do. Lama encouraged all kinds of awareness in us. He often gave us spoonfuls of the Amrita he kept on his altar. It was made of crushed blessed pills, honey and alcohol. We'd sit there like little kids with outstretched palms, licking the stuff off. He'd roll his eyes back into his head and just beam. Peter Kedge, coolie and engineer. While Anne was in retreat, Peter Kedge took over her work. Suddenly I found myself in charge up Kopan Hill, said Peter. The monsoon really hit during the first couple of nights. Anne was in retreat. It rained continuously, and the hill began to crumble and wash away to within a few feet of the new Gompa wall. The weight of responsibility suddenly became very heavy. With the help of Ram and some other locals, we built quite a sophisticated retaining wall that lasted more than 20 years until the next new Gompa was built. Max moved up to Kopan. When she returned from Lincoln School in the evenings, she pitched right in with hauling bricks up from the bottom of the hill in the jeep. Without Peter, things would never have gotten done, said Max. We had our problems. Sometimes we'd just sit there and look out over the valley and ask, why us? Why can't we sit in the Gompa and do retreat? How come we're the ones that have to do all this hard, dirty work? Lama Yeshe began creating a garden at Kopan. He'd walk around with Max, planting the many fruit trees and bulbs he brought up in the jeep, pointing out which piece of land he wanted to buy next, and telling her what he wanted to build on it. More money was needed because Lama wanted to buy his guru Trijang Rinpoche's old house in Dharamsala. He still spent days in downtown Kathmandu, wheeling and dealing with Jampa Trinley and learning about money. Max's old Hudson hadn't been driven for several years. She also had a blue Volkswagen she had acquired in exchange for some Russian art. Peter Kedge expressed an interest in staying around, and Anne and Max asked him if he could repair the Hudson. Peter. It was languishing at Max's Rana house where she sometimes still stayed. I was given board and lodging there and spent the next 3 months competing with the chickens, which had made the car their home, and getting it back into working order. Subsequently, I really enjoyed driving it around Kathmandu for a while. During that summer, the school began operating in Laudo. It became my job to go to Kathmandu Airport every morning around 6 o'clock with sacks of rice, sugar, flour, tins of kerosene, and other supplies that I had to try to talk onto the Twin Otter aircraft that flew up to Lukla every morning, if the weather was suitable. Many mornings during that monsoon, I'd go to the airport and wait with the airport staff to see if there would be a break in the weather and the plane could leave. The next morning I'd go back and do the same thing, in hopes of sending some of it up to Lukla and then by porter to Laudo. Then Max got a message from Laudo that money had completely run out. That was a crisis. Luckily, the Hudson was working. One of the Americans, working at the American Embassy, agreed to buy it, and within 1 or 2 days it was sold. The $2,000 or so Max received was immediately converted into rupees and sent up to Laudo, and the crisis was over for the time being. Max had a moment's sentimentality over selling the car. Marty proposed to me in it, she sniffed, but she was prepared to do anything to help Lamayeshi. Not long after the Hudson was sold, Peter Kedge cleaned up Max's blue Volkswagen, boot-polished the tires, made the inside smell like new leather, and sold that, too. That money went straight to Kopan to help pay for construction. Besides pouring money into Kopan and the Laudo Gompa School and supporting the Lamas, Max also opened her Rana house to a variety of students. There were almost always at least a half-dozen staying there, some for several months. Twice, Max sponsored 4-month-long summer retreats for some 15 months from Samtenling and paid school fees for various children. She never drew attention to what she did for others, nor did she ever seem to expect anything in return. Kopan's new retreat rooms were filling up. The first 2 occupants were Robbie and Rhonda Solik. They were thrilled to be back. "How's Piero?" they asked Lamayeshi. He screwed up his face and answered sadly, "Piero's dead." Of course they were stunned, shaken, and grief-stricken. Lama let them wallow in that for a few minutes, then burst out laughing. Hadn't they been studying impermanence? Jan Willis was back too. During a long interview with him, she burst into tears with frustration over some obstacles she had encountered while doing her PhD in Buddhist studies. Suddenly she laid the blame on Lama's door. "His reaction was so quick, so strong," said Jan. "He started rubbing his mala up and down my back, saying Mahakala mantras. 'Don't blame Lama for this,' he told me. He didn't want me to mess up my karma with him. My problems were always academic and intellectual, but he had a way of making them so simple." Paula Kulkin. As trekking season approached, Mehdi Devis came back to Kopan with a new American girlfriend, Paula Kulkin. Lamayeshi immediately ordered lunch for them, which was served by Anila Ann. Paula, fresh from the San Francisco hippie scene, had never seen a Buddhist nun before. She stared and stared. She and Mehdi rented a house nearby. Paula quietly observed Lama Yeshe. I began to realize how intelligent, perceptive, and wise he was, and so nice. Every time I asked a question, I received an answer. Everyone else was meditating, and I didn't know how, so I was bored. I asked him for a mantra and a visualization so I too could experience what they were after. They called it a realization. He sat quite still for a while before saying anything. I want you to go home and think about your life before now, going backwards until the day before you were born. Do that twice a day for at least 20 minutes. Then come back and tell me what you have found. I was so disappointed. It wasn't what I thought of as meditation, but I did what I was told. Going back over my life made me realize a lot of unpleasant things about myself. After a week, I went back and I told him I was shocked to find that I had an enormous amount of pride. He sat there with his eyes closed and said, "Very good, dear. You go back and do that for one more week and come again." That was all. The following week, I got deeper into observing how I functioned with my parents, my boyfriends, and friends. I realized I had caused them a lot of pain. I cried a lot that week, and then went back to see Lama Yeshe again. I told him I'd realized that the only person I'd ever considered was myself. He gave me a small visualization and the mantra from the Heart Sutra, Tayata Gate Gate Paragate Parasamgate Bodhi Soha. I thought it must be a beginner's mantra. I didn't know it was actually the essence of Buddha's most profound wisdom teachings. This will stop you from suffering, he said. He went away for a while after that, and I missed him badly. Then one day I sensed he was back. I went up to Kopan in the pouring rain, and sure enough, there he was. Everyone was having dinner, when suddenly, and without making it in any way obvious, he put his hand on mine and said, "You came to see me, dear? You have something to talk about?" I told him I wanted to take refuge in precepts, something Carol Corona had explained to me. He thought for a while, then said, "No, dear, you go to Laudo. You take refuge from Lama Zopa up there." I said I didn't know Lama Zopa. I was actually a little scared of what I'd heard about him. Such an ascetic. But apparently, Lama Yeshe wanted me to have my refuge connection with Lama Zopa so that I would have a strong connection with both of them. From Lama Yeshe's teachings. Taking refuge isn't something new. We have all taken refuge since we were born, right up until now. When we are children, we cry, "Mama." That means we are taking refuge in her. You understand? When you cry, you are taking refuge. You are saying something. "I'm not happy." You know this whether you know language or not. We take refuge in wealth, in friends, in each other. We take refuge for security, for happiness. That means all the time we're doing the best we can for ourselves in order to be happy. Taking refuge in Buddha means we consider the words of the Buddha to be totally developed, honest wisdom, light rather than darkness. The Laudo School reopens. Lama Zopa Rinpoche returned to Laudo in May. The walls were built and glass windows had been laboriously hauled up and installed. Now a roof was needed. Along came Philippe Camus. Once a member of the French Foreign Legion, Philippe was from a wealthy French family. He wanted to make some sort of reparation for some of the actions he had done during his military service, and spent hours closeted with Lama Yeshe, who called him "my father." He offered to fund the roof at Laudo. Philippe possessed enormous drive and charm and needed every ounce of it to persuade pilots to fly building materials up to Lukla. Losong Nyima went too, organizing porters to carry 130 sheets of corrugated iron. They were able to complete the roof just before the monsoon rains came. Philippe Camus employed that charm once again when he managed to persuade his mother to donate the interest on one of her Swiss bank accounts to the Lamas. Lama Yeshe arrived in time for the formal opening of the Laudo Gompa School, now called Mount Everest Center for Buddhist Studies, the name chosen by Lama Zopa Rinpoche. The first boys to be enrolled when the project was announced had numbered an auspicious 5, which made everybody very happy, as it was the same number as the Buddha's first disciples. This year, nearly 30 boys took Rabjung ordination from Geshe Tupten Tashi. Sherpa children are quite small, but their parents are very practical, so they provided their boys with robes far too big for them. The young monks often wore them folded over, allowing for plenty of room to grow. By this time, Michael Casapides was living with his mother at the All India Radio Hostel in Delhi, but wanted to go back to Kopan. Mary Devis and Paula Kulkin visited them in Delhi, and after checking with Domo Geshe Rinpoche, took Michael back to Nepal with them. By now, he was 6 years old. Maddie had raised money in the Netherlands for the school Lama Zopa Rinpoche was opening, but when we arrived at Kopan, we found that Rinpoche had already left for Laudo, said Paula. Maddie and Michael traveled to Laudo with Massimo, where Michael was ordained. His ordination name was Losong Yeshe, and he soon became known as Michael Losong Yeshe, a name that has remained with him for all of his life. When the monsoon was over, Paula and Carol, with her baby daughter Maitri Dolma, went up to Laudo. Lama Yeshe invited Massimo to sponsor a tantric puja at the small nunnery at Tamo, a village just below Laudo. I sat on the side and watched Lama turn himself into a marble statue, said Massimo. He was utterly still. Afterward, he thanked me for sponsoring the puja and said, "Did you see? During the puja, Lama is gone. Lama is not there. One day, dear, you will learn that the real guru is inside you." In a few words, Lama cut so deep, Massimo continued. Tantra was just an exciting word we had picked up, but we knew nothing about it. Tantra is like a spaceship. Sutra is like a bicycle, dear, Lama told us. The Inji spent the summer up at Laudo teaching the boys English and doing retreat. Oa Del Banco spent months translating Milarepa's songs into Danish, and Chris Kolb lived in a primitive hermitage eating only the most basic foods. Lama Yeshe went back down to the valley and returned again in September, distinctly attired in a pair of pink rubber galoshes and a white parka. Young Sherpa boys lined the paths with white katas, having seen us below in the potato field, said Robbie Solik, who was in Lama's party. Having asked Lama's permission to leave retreat, Robbie got the last seat on the plane to Lukla. We spent about 8 days there and brought supplies of powdered paint for a Dutch artist, Vem, who came up later to paint the walls. Lama, Robbie, Jampa Zangpo left after 2 weeks. Zopa Rinpoche, Geshe Tashi, Losong Nyima, the other Westerners, and the young monks left at the beginning of October. The walk from Laudo to Kathmandu usually took about 2 weeks, although a very fit Sherpa could do it in about 5 days. However, this group traveled by airplane, so it must have been with some considerable trepidation that these Sherpa children, stumbling along in their oversized robes, followed their new teacher down to Lukla, climbed into the airplanes Max had chartered, and flew to Kathmandu. In the Kathmandu Valley, they saw cars, trucks, electricity, heard radios, ate strange foods, all sorts of incomprehensible things and experiences for the very first time. One of these monks, Tupten Sherab, told Westerners later that he thought the valley where he grew up and the surrounding mountains were the entire world and there was nothing beyond. These boys need a mother, Lama told Max when they arrived at Kopan. You are their mummy Max. Max had received the name Losong Yeshe Drolma at her ordination. Lobsang means good heart or good mind. Yeshe means primordial wisdom, and Drolma is the Tibetan name for Tara. Nevertheless, she was known as Mommy Max by the lamas and everyone else for many years. Chris Kolb visits Zina. Over at Tupten Chirling, Zina was digging in for her first winter. She continued to write long letters to the lamas. I could not understand many of her letters, said Lama Zopa. She did Yamantaka retreat and Vajrayogini retreat and had incredible experiences. She made a lot of paintings of Vajrayogini. Lama had sent her there with a huge mantra commitment and some teachings. On their way up to Laudo, Chris Kolb and Oa called in to see her. Chris, we took a whole bunch of psilocybin mushrooms with us and walked up through the pouring rain, tripping out of our heads. That was the last time I ever took psychedelics. Tupten Chirling was a very heavy place. I walked into the kitchen and a huge Tibetan Mastiff was on me in a second. I was terrified, but the Tibetans didn't give a damn. Trulsik Rinpoche's name means precious annihilator, and he was very heavy, very tough, very beautiful. A monk took us to see Zina, who was installed in their guest house. She was having a hard time and seemed pretty pleased to see us. Tupten Chirling operated as though it was still 800 years ago, and Trulsik Rinpoche didn't alter the routine one iota for Zina. Now she had to put her money where her mouth was. We stayed with her for 2 days, sleeping in her room while she read to me from her journal. From there we went to Laudo, where I had the great pleasure of seeing the old Laudo Lama's trousers. He had been a little guy and wore these sheepskin trousers turned inside out, and hadn't taken them off for 20 years. By this time I had decided to give up smoking dope, and that meditation was the true path. Paula Kulkin also called in on her way back from Laudo. Zina's retreat house was a little gem. It had a little walled garden and was beautifully painted with murals inside. It was very comfortable, and she seemed very happy there, though she was concerned about how her mother was caring for Rhea. She told me that when she had a question for Trulsik Rinpoche, she wrote him a note, and he replied in her dreams. Lama Yeshe buys his guru's old house in Dharamsala. As mentioned earlier, Lama Yeshe had suddenly left the March Kopan course to go to Dharamsala to take teachings from Trijang Rinpoche. While there, he also bought a house. From Nepal, accompanied by Jampa Zangpo, Lama had flown down to Delhi, where they took rooms in a hotel close to the airport. Lama was carrying $7,500 in American banknotes, donated by Piero Cherry, said Jampa. We went to see the money changers, who told us to meet them on the street outside a hotel. A taxi pulled up, and we got in and drove down the street a bit. The money changers gave me a wad of rupees, and I gave them a wad of dollars, and we started counting. Lama was muttering mantras and laughing, being his usual self, as I counted this huge pile of rupees. Eventually I finished, and they drove off, leaving us on the street, 6 blocks from the hotel, with all this money. The next morning, we took a taxi to the bus depot, and after a long, hard, 12-hour bus ride to Dharamsala, went straight to Nawarji Koti, as the house was called. The 4-acre property had previously been the temporary home of Gyabje Trijong Rinpoche after the Indian government had allowed the Tibetan government in exile to move from Mussoorie to Dharamsala in late April 1960. Just below Nawarji Koti was the Swarg Ashram, also called the Old Palace, where His Holiness the Dalai Lama had stayed from 1960 to 1968, while his permanent residence, Tekchen Churling, was being built. Geshe Rabten had also stayed in a small house close by, and Gyabje Ling Rinpoche's house was just a few hundred yards away on the other side of the hill. Lama could think of nothing more wonderful than buying his guru's old house. Oh, Lord, what a run-down old house, thought Max, when he brought her there for the first time. But Lama just loved the place, which was on a good piece of land. He had a senior lawyer in Dharamsala and negotiated the whole deal himself, said Max. The house was owned by an old Parsi family, the Nawarjis, who owned and ran the general store beside the bus stop in McLeod Ganj. Mrs. Nawarji was a consummate businesswoman, and the deal did not come cheap. Lama registered as the new owner of the house as His Holiness the Dalai Lama, as no entity yet existed to hold the property, and Lama did not want to have it in his own name. Piero, Claudio, Massimo, Carol, and some other students were already staying at Nawarji Koti, renamed Tushita Retreat Center, when Lama arrived in October to fill the silent, pine-scented nights with his glorious laughter. Grabbing one student by the arm, he led him around the property and described what he intended to build and where. Retreat houses here and here, a stupa over there. He declared that many people would come to meditate, transform their minds, and eventually be of benefit to all sentient beings. The front room is perfect for meditation, said Lama Yeshe. You need an expansive view for that. We can make some heavy dark curtains so there is no distraction. He wanted his students to have a different kind of expansive view. There was also a big room that had been Trijong Rinpoche's own room. Lama took that for himself. Around this time, Lama Yeshe gave Massimo and Carol a private Vajrasattva initiation at Tushita. He had given it to us before, said Massimo, but this time it felt so strong and powerful. We were in Lama's big room, and he placed tormas on our head as we sat in silence with our eyes closed. Then he said, "Okay, now think. Massimo, Massimo, where is Massimo? Just think deeply, and when you feel Massimo is there in your mind, just check that." He said it very slowly with a lot of pauses. I had heard this kind of thing before, but this time when he said, "Okay, this Massimo that you see, it is nothing," suddenly I felt what I'd always thought was me was now gone. I experienced a real emptiness. Lama Yeshe teaches at the Tibetan Library. Tushita Retreat Center was up a very steep track on one side of the small town of McLeod Ganj. On the other side of the town, down a steep hill, lay the Library of Tibetan Works and Archives, which His Holiness the Dalai Lama had founded the year before in 1971. The library was part of the official enclave of the Tibetan government in exile, called Gangshen Kyeshong. Geshe Nalman Dargay began teaching Buddhism to Westerners there in 1972, assisted by two graduates of the young Lama's home school, Kamlung Rinpoche and Sharpa Tulku, both of whom had studied with Geshe Zopa in America. When it was learned that Trijang Rinpoche had requested a visiting monk from Nepal to speak to the Engis at the library, the entire foreign population of the town turned up, about 50 people in all. Among them was a Canadian, Glenn Mullen. The door opened, and we saw a small, elf-like creature with a wide, mischievous smile and twinkling eyes. He looked tiny. Then the next minute he seemed huge, filling the doorway. I had the impression that he looked exclusively at me, but later learned that each one of us had thought the same thing. He half shuffled, half glided toward the throne, and once seated, began to chant the mantra of Guru Shakyamuni Buddha, Tayata Om Muni Muni Maha Muniye Soha. Each clearly defined syllable he uttered was as explosive as a firecracker. As he continued chanting, my body started shaking so much I thought there was an earthquake. They were common in the region. I wanted to shout an alarm, but then I looked at the water bowls and saw that they were utterly still. I looked back at Lama Yeshe. His eyes were like suns blazing across 1,000 universes, and I thought, so this is what Lama Tsongkhapa meant when he said that on meeting the Guru, some clutched their breasts in fear. A football player from Wisconsin College, Jim Doherty, was seated in the front row at that teaching. I'd heard stories about gurus who just put their finger on you and immediately you experience samadhi. I was waiting for something like that to happen to me. At first I saw him as all humble and bent over, but once on the throne, he suddenly grew huge. He went into some deep meditation, but his face was all movement, his tongue rolling in his mouth. He was sort of swallowing and puffing, and I swear, growing by inches. I was thinking, is he going to blow up? Then he opened his eyes. The pupils were all rolled back. He said nothing. When the director of the library introduced him, he smiled graciously in reply, but still said nothing. When he finally spoke, it was to criticize us for our lack of practice and our purely intellectual approach to the Dharma. He said that to put the Dharma into practice, we must change our lives. You can't get Dharma just from reading books, going to lectures, filling notebooks, and memorizing Tibetan. Aha, I thought, this is the coach. He was just what I was looking for. It was as if he knew all about our witty Dharma conversations in the tea shops. You're not changing at all. You're just wasting Geshe Nalman Dargay's precious time and the efforts of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who specifically set up these teachings in the library for you. Before catching the bus back to Delhi, Lama Yeshe installed Jampa Zangpo as the first manager of Tushita Retreat Center, with instructions to set up the place for retreat. Then he went to inform the local police he was leaving town, a strict requirement for all Tibetans moving from one place to another. In the pouring rain, some students gathered at Nawarji's store to see him off. The bus was about to leave, but Lama was nowhere to be seen. Suddenly they spied a red arrow shooting towards them. It was Lama Yeshe, Zen tied down over his head with a loop of his mala, Arab style, splashing along in those pink rubber galoshes. He was laughing and smiling all over his face. It had been a very successful trip. The third Kopan meditation course. In November, Lama Zopa Rinpoche taught his third meditation course. Around 50 people attended, including Massimo Corona and his brother Luca, Piero and Claudio, Paula Kulkin, and Peter Kedge. Advertising flyers appeared in Kathmandu cafes such as the Camp Hotel, where Marcel Bertels, a serious Dutch lad from a conservative Catholic family, had just met a French-Canadian, Nicole Couture. They both decided to do the course, as it was now called. An Australian couple, Nick Rybush, a doctor, and Marie Obst, a nurse, also heard about the course and went up to Kopan to check things out. On the notice board they found advertisements for Lama Zopa Rinpoche's month-long Kopan course, costing 300 rupees, as well as the Burmese teacher Goenka's 10 days Vipassana course down in Kathmandu for 100 rupees. "Let's do the short one," said Marie. After a full Catholic upbringing, she was more interested in shedding religion than acquiring a new one. But having read a book on Buddhism in Laos, Nick was looking, and they booked into the longer one. 26-year-old law graduate Heli Pelais, the only child of a prominent Spanish cardiologist from Granada, was definitely looking. Running into Steve Molaski and his mother in Amala's, Boudrenaut's only restaurant, she heard about the course and subsequently attended an early group interview with Lama Yeshe. "Why do you want to do the course?" Lama asked. "I said I didn't know if I could even do it," said Heli. "According to him, everybody could, even animals. I thought him strange and was glad to see he wasn't the one teaching. While I was walking back down to my room in Boda, I started to feel funny, like someone was with me in my mind, working on it, stronger and stronger. Back in my room, I then spent the next 2 most horrible days of my life. I cried non-stop. The fact is, I'd had lots of fights with my parents and led a very unstable life. Coming to India was a last resort for me. I had decided if this course didn't change things for me, I was going to kill myself." A week before it began, I moved to Kopan. Lama Yeshe had gone to Dharamsala, and I thought, good, I don't want to see him. Nick, Marie, Heli, and an English girl, Suzanne Lee, walked up to Kopan together. On the way they encountered Anila Ann, bald, robes tied around her long, skinny frame, working like a ditch digger at a trouble spot in the road. From the hill they were able to look down into the magical valley, carved into terraced rice paddies, with 2-story ochre-colored houses hedged with roses. Chickens clucked in attics, chilies dried on the roofs, were laid out in neatly swept forecourts. Dogs barked incessantly, and children crawled across the fields, "Babu! Didi!" Hindu puja bells tinkled, incense wafted on the air, and old men puffed on beedis in the shade of ancient trees. Winding through this scene ran a rutted, dirty dirt road that became a rough track, from which branched little paths like rivulets, a couple of which led up to the top of Kopan Hill. Here they came, the fortunate traveling children of the world's middle classes, toting their backpacks, super-down sleeping bags, toilet paper, and patented antibiotic medicines. They carried well-thumbed copies of Hermann Hesse's Siddharthas, Baba Ramdas's Be Here Now, and Lama Govinda's The Way of the White Clouds. The Kopan course was becoming the place to be, even though Kopan had no electricity and all the monastery's water had to be carried up the hill from a spring 150 feet below the Gompa, in 2 big Nepalese biscuit tins dangling from a yoke, balanced across the porter's shoulders. The chief water carrier was a cheery Nepali, Bir Bahadur. Hashish was still legal in Nepal, But while some occasionally slipped down the hill for a chillum or two, most did the course straight from beginning to end. Blotting paper tabs of LSD were carefully tucked away. Everyone was given a copy of the cyclo-styled notes that Massimo Corona, Ani La Anne, and others had prepared from the first two courses. These were now neatly tied together in what looked like a shoelace, and placed in a heavy rice paper folder that bore an extensive title similar in length to those of traditional Sanskrit and Tibetan scriptures, the wish-fulfilling golden sun of the Mahayana practice. This was one of the first Lamrim teachings to appear in English, and the way Rinpoche taught in the early courses was to read a sentence or two from the Golden Sun, then give a commentary on what he had just read. This could range from just a few words to several day expositions on the topic in question. The popular view that Buddhism was not really a religion was somewhat undermined by Lama Zopa Rinpoche's monastic demeanor and the fact that quite a few prayers were recited regularly. Nevertheless, the principles of the Lamrim are universal and adjustable to any society at any time. This is, perhaps, their most magical and fascinating characteristic. The following prayer, translated into English by Lama Zopa Rinpoche, contains every step in the Lamrim and is therefore a very good illustration of the teachings underpinning the Kopan courses, which continue to this day. The teachings of the direct meditation, which includes the important points of the graduated path. Refuge. I take refuge in the Holy Guru, who is the essence of all Buddhas, the originator of granting all holy teachings of realizations and holy words, orders of the Buddha, and Lord of all supreme beings. Prayer for success in Dharma practice and following the Guru Buddha. Please, all you Guru Buddhas, bestow upon me the ability to transform my mind in Dharma and to be successful in practicing Dharma for receiving the gradual path, and may no hindrance occur in receiving this path. Lower Beings Prayer. Please bestow upon me the ability to achieve virtuous actions and to expel negative actions, and take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha with all my heart, by recognizing that I have received a perfect human rebirth, which is highly meaningful and difficult to obtain due to very variable and difficult causes, and is very perishable and subject to decay in the shortest second because of its changeable nature. My death is very definite, and the actual time is very indefinite. Karma is very profound, and the sufferings of the lower realm are very unimaginably unbearable. The Middle Being's Prayer. As a consequence of the above, thus, we receive a higher rebirth, but we still must experience limitless samsaric suffering because of uncontrolled delusion and karma. Therefore, we must think and realize profoundly the evolution of samsara from uncontrolled rebirth to death to rebirth. Please bestow upon me the ability, night and day, to follow the three higher practices of the path, conduct, concentration, and wisdom, which are the main methods to release me from samsara. Higher Beings Prayer. There is not one samsaric being who has not been my mother, so please grant me blessings for the ability to help all sentient beings, success by myself, by renouncing even the perfect happiness of self, the lower vehicle, and following the 6 bodhisattva deeds, the 6 paramitas, with the bodhisattva's mind, by changing oneself into others, based on the basis of equilibrium and meditation. Higher Beings Prayer to fully gain tantric practice. Thus, we have no sorrow in experiencing samsaric suffering for sentient beings, no matter how long, by training the mind in the general path. Please grant me blessings to be able to follow the quick Vajrayana teachings by feeling the sentient being's suffering, very unimaginably unbearable for even the shortest second, as my own suffering, and to achieve very quickly the attainment of the Guru Shakyamuni, Dorje Chang, in this very lifetime, right now, by keeping the ordination on orders of the Guru, with the best and highest care in life. For all these reasons, I am going to meditate on the gradual path. Lama Zopa's teaching plan during this course was to concentrate on the hell realms. On and on, day after day, there was talk of hell realms and still more hell realms, all in Rinpoche's halting English, punctuated by frequent pauses and long silences. It is no coincidence that Rinpoche's name, Zopa, means patience. Most of the students present did not realize that during these long silences, Rinpoche meditated deeply. When he did speak, to the untrained ear, Rinpoche sounded as though he were simply repeating himself. In actuality, each time he addressed his subject matter, he did so from a slightly different angle, thereby allowing his listeners to enter more and more deeply into the experience he was describing. Westerners were used to receiving information in a more linear fashion, and were often looking for something prepackaged, some spiritual insight they could swallow whole. Rinpoche's style required them to stop, listen, and turn over in their minds what they were hearing. Those who related to Rinpoche's teachings as they were listening to a university lecturer could easily become frustrated by his seemingly endless repetitions. However, those who followed what he was saying as if they were being led through a guided meditation, which in fact they were, found his style of teaching remarkably effective for their minds and often deeply moving. After the 7th course, Rinpoche would explain what he thought was going on with respect to his teaching style during these early courses. A few students escaped the course on the full noon night to attend the legendary acid parties at Swayambhu. One New Yorker returned the next day literally trembling, having experienced the hell realms during his acid trip in all the vivid detail Lama Zopa had just spent several days describing. From Rinpoche's teachings at the 3rd course. Even at this moment, most beings are suffering in the 3 lower realms, especially in the Narak realms. Their suffering has not been created by God or fixed by some other being. It is only a creation of those suffering beings' minds. Just as in a dream, we may sometimes suffer a fire or from all kinds of fearful persons or demons fighting and frightening us. In the same way that these fearful dreams and visions are the creations of our elusive mind, so are the suffering and the realms of the Naraks and so forth the creation of beings' ignorant minds. However, the Narak realms are not the same as dreams, but are karmic creations of the ignorant mind. This is similar to the way that one place can be seen differently by 2 different people. One may see a clean place, while another person may see a dirty place, and a human may see a cup of water, while a god may see nectar, and a preta may see pus. Although the object is the same, the view varies according to the level of the mind, fortune, and the karma the being has created. As the mind reaches higher levels, the enjoyments and the visions change, and the transcendental awareness and happiness that we experience increases more and more. Each living being's samsara is a creation of that mind. Each living being's enlightenment is also a mental creation. In a dim room, lit by a small candle with a flickering flame, a person without acute perception may see a fearful moving animal or a demon, become afraid, and perhaps throw something at it. This problem is only the creation of that person's mind. The person with a calm, relaxed mind, on the other hand, will see what is actually there clearly. All experiences are created by the mind, and similarly, the suffering of the Narak being is merely the creation of the suffering being's mind. Therefore, the choice to experience suffering, to be in a suffering realm, or to be in the perfect peace of enlightenment, depends on the decision of the mind. Shantideva said, "Without the creator of suffering, the negative mind, who arranges the red-hot ground?" Guru Shakyamuni said, "No one has arranged the thousands of ways of suffering but one's own evil mind." Firstly, it is important to read page 62 to see the reasons for meditating on the suffering realms. If we are afraid of paintings of the three lower realms that depict the subject's suffering in different ways, why shouldn't we fear the actual suffering? If we are afraid of even the temporal physical sufferings that we sometimes experience, why shouldn't we fear the greater sufferings that exist? The only reason we are not afraid is because we do not remember the beginningless times we have suffered in those realms before due to the intervention of death and rebirth, and to ignorance. We even forget the sufferings from the earlier parts of this life. We don't remember the suffering of those past countless lives when we were born as sentient beings, so that means we haven't yet achieved the complete cessation of suffering. We need the practice of Dharma to stop the causes of suffering. The main purpose of meditation on the hills is to give us a clearer idea. In the case of the animal realms, we should put ourselves in their place and check up on their sufferings. Think about pigs killed in India, for example. They are put in a sack and stuck in the heart with bamboo, and they scream horribly. Animals have much less freedom than we do. We treat them like they are vegetables, but those who have mind have suffering. Fish are sliced up while they are still alive. Maggots are fried alive to be used by popped rice as a Chinese delicacy at big parties. These beings are also sentient beings with mind. Some who were attended were irritated by the course, others inspired. Marcel Bartels took to it like a duck to water and was soon meditating even during the session breaks. College graduates happily prostrated themselves over and over and chanted mantras as if they had been saying them all their lives. The more excitable claimed they saw lights and had visions. Maybe they did. During the breaks, everyone except Marcel chatted and gossiped. During the lectures that followed, Lama Zopa told them what they had been talking about. They were convinced he was clairvoyant. The whole experience felt very close, magical, and powerful. In what would become a pattern, Lama Yeshe kept a low profile during the course. None of the new students even knew he existed until one day Anila Ann asked Nick Rybush if he could come and see Lama. He had cut his shin on a glass-top coffee table in his room, and the wound had become infected. I was told he had a heart problem, so I thought it best to give him a course of penicillin, said Nick. However, when it came time to give him his first injection, I hadn't tightened the needle to the barrel of the syringe properly, and the stuff shot out all over the place. It's okay, dear, he told me. Maybe we try again tomorrow. So I visited him daily for the next 5 days to give him his shot and change the dressings. From then on, he became known as Dr. Nick. Lama Zopa Rinpoche had been telling everyone it was harder for a woman to become enlightened than for a man, which upset all the women. Marie asked Nick to seek Lama Yeshe's opinion. When they came to learn that he'd told Nick, of course women can get enlightened, Lama Yeshe instantly became their hero. As it turns out, this disagreement between the lamas was more apparent than real. In talking about the additional difficulties women faced in becoming enlightened, Rinpoche was addressing in part the unfortunate but very real obstacles that women, especially those in patriarchal societies, must overcome if they dare to defy cultural expectations in their desire to pursue a solitary life of contemplation. Lama Yeshe addressed the issue from a different perspective. His response, that men and women had the same spiritual capacity, focused upon the fact that everyone, whether male or female, equally possessed the Buddha nature, the potential to achieve full enlightenment. From this point of view, there is absolutely no difference between the sexes. At the very end of the course, Lama Yeshe gave a talk. By this time, many students had heard of him, although few had seen him. It didn't take long to work out that here was the real power behind Kopan. Before actually conferring refuge and lay precepts, Lama Yeshe spoke to the course students about the meaning of taking refuge and committing to taking any number of the 5 lay precepts. While he spoke, Rinpoche sat in the back of the room, writing out refuge names in Tibetan. At the end of the refuge ceremony, Marie received the name Yeshe Kadro, a name she kept for life, often abbreviated to YK. As for Nick, he received the name Thupten Zopa, but out of his great respect for Rinpoche, never used it. In any case, everyone was already calling him Dr. Nick, so Dr. Nick he remained. Both were very happy they had chosen to do the long course. Lama Yeshe on refuge. Buddha refuge is a process of turning inward that begins with our discovery of our own unlimited potential as human beings. This discovery generates tremendous zeal for the development of our own inborn wisdom energy. Complete, perfect wisdom is Buddhahood. Perhaps the word Buddha conjures up a remote and rather oriental image, but Buddha is just a word, and it means totally open mind, an opened lotus. When we finally realize our human potential and arrive at this total openness of mind, we become Buddhas. However, at the outset, we feel hopeless, helpless, and incapable of self-improvement. Buddha seems to be somewhere in the sky, completely out of reach, and we are nothing. But this is not true. We should not underestimate ourselves. Shakyamuni, the historical Buddha, was once even more confused than we are, but by discovering his own latent wisdom energy, he attained enlightenment. There are countless Buddhas, and all living beings have the innate capacity to unify their minds with the unsurpassable clarity of enlightenment. 12 students also took the 5 lay precepts from Lama Yeshe. They vowed not to kill, steal, lie, engage in sexual misconduct, or become intoxicated. An American, Barbara Vautier, was present with her Swiss husband, Chris. Up until then, I hadn't thought of myself as the sort of person who would ever take vows, said Barbara. But everything Lama Yeshe said made such perfect sense. To hear that incredible laughter from the Lama's rooms at night was a kind of message about what that mental state they described might be like. After the refuge ceremony, everyone gathered for a Green Tara initiation, which was also attended by some monks visiting from Bodhanath. Max provided the focal offering, a huge layer cake covered in green icing from the commissary. The gompa was beautifully decorated, and the celebration a splendid affair. When the course was over, a few raced back to Kathmandu for a steak. Copan meals were vegetarian and very basic. Or perhaps a joint, or 6. Others, encouraged by Lama Yeshe to consolidate what they had learned, went into retreat. Heli spent her retreat in tears, and then, on the advice of the lamas, went to Bodh Gaya and did 100,000 prostrations. Intent on pursuing his meditation on Lam Rim, Marcel Bartels rented a room on the first floor of the farmhouse, less than a mile from Copan. It belonged to Vishnu, Ram's brother, said Martel. The weather was extremely cold, and I had a hard time staying warm. When I visited Nick and Marie, who were staying in another farmhouse just a few meters away, I found they had no problem with the cold because their room was above the stables. The 2 water buffalo downstairs proved to be very effective heaters and kept their room nice and warm. I must admit I was a little jealous. During the last 2 weeks of Rinpoche's course, we had all taken the 8 Mahayana precepts, and a few of us who stayed on after the course continued with this practice. The system was very simple, Marcel continued. At about 5:30 a.m., 2 or 3 of us walked up to Copan and gathered outside Rinpoche's room. We then lightly scratched on the fly screen on Rinpoche's door and opened it slightly. This woke Rinpoche out of the deep meditation we always found him in. The person who gives the 8 Mahayana precepts must first take them himself. So Rinpoche would get up, wash, and spend a few minutes taking the precepts. Then he gave them to us. When the others dropped out, I went a number of times by myself. Rinpoche never showed any sign of displeasure or concern about the interruption of his meditation session, or for them being obliged to only eat 1 meal that day. Only Rinpoche's dog, Drolma, who slept on his bed, seemed slightly irritated with our arrival from time to time. It was the most incredible example of selfless action. It was as if this high being was just waiting there for you and making himself available in case you wanted to create merit. This was human behavior of a kind I had never experienced before. Marie and I had both decided we really wanted to stay at Copan. About 10 days after the course, we each did a 1-week Lam Rim retreat in the tiny rooms of the Sangha house. That's when I started writing letters to all my friends in Australia, said Nick. My analytical meditation consisted of mentally debating family and friends, trying to convince them of the truth of the Dharma. By the end of the session, I was so fired up that I just had to write to whoever it was I had just vanquished. Marcel had an interview with Lama. I had written down some questions I wanted to ask him, but he just rolled his eyes and acted bored. When I left for Tushita to go to a Goenka course, he gave me a letter to take to Peter there. It was unsealed, so I read it. Please give Marcel a room at Tushita and let him stay as long as he likes. I think he is a real searcher for truth, Lama had written. One student, who had come to Nepal looking for hash, but ended up doing the course instead, complained to Lama Yeshe afterwards that hash wasn't as much fun anymore. You won't ever smoke it again, will you, dear? Said Lama. He did not, but again, Lama had different advice for different people, depending on what he considered most beneficial for them at that stage in their lives. Piero had returned to Italy, declaring that he would be back. When you get to Italy, you will meet ladies, said Lama. Girls will come up to you and say, Piero, you have learned incredible things in India, so please teach me. Then you will get involved with that girl. That's how it will be. I thought he was being a bit old-fashioned, but after 1 week in Italy, I met a beautiful girl who came out with exactly this question. He and his friend Claudio Zipulo both returned to Copan to do the third meditation course. Piero was a dedicated student, but still very laid back. One day, just before Christmas, Lama had a message delivered to him while he was enjoying some hash in a cafe in town, telling him he was to be ordained the next day. Piero immediately went up to see him. "Tomorrow," thundered Lama Yeshe, and then promptly made arrangements for the ceremony to take place in Bodh Gaya in January, which it did. One more instance of Lama Yeshe keeping a student on his toes. But first, those Christmas. Lama Yeshe had a great appreciation for the spirit of Christmas, but not for the rampant consumerism and materialistic expectations that often came with it. Some of his students were also experiencing the difficulties of separating from the Christian tradition they grew up with as they established a connection with the Buddhist tradition they had just met. This confusion seemed to result in some feelings of aversion towards their Christian heritage, and Christmas seemed an ideal time to talk with them about these mistaken attitudes. From Lama Yeshe's Christmas Talks. When we see each other again on Christmas Eve for the celebration of Holy Jesus' birth, let us do so in peace, with a good vibration and a happy mind. I think it would be wonderful. To attend the celebration with an angry disposition would be so sad. Come instead with a beautiful motivation and much love. Have no discrimination, but see everything as a golden flower, even your worst enemy. Then Christmas, which so often produces an agitated mind, will become beautiful. When you change your mental attitude, the external vision also changes. This is a true turning of the mind. There is no doubt about this. I am not special, but I have had experience doing this, and it works. You people are so intelligent, so you can understand how the mind has this ability to change itself and its environment. There is no reason why this change cannot be for the better. Some of you might think, "Oh, I want to have nothing to do with Jesus, nothing to do with the Bible." This is a very angry, emotional attitude to have toward Christianity. If you really understood, you would recognize that what Jesus said was love. It is as simple and profound as that. When you have true love within you, I am sure that you will feel much more peaceful than you do now. How do you normally think of love? Be honest. It is always involved with discrimination, isn't it? Just look around this room and see if anyone here is an object of your love. Why do you discriminate so sharply between friend and enemy? Why do you see such a big difference between yourself and others? In the Buddhist teaching, this falsely discriminating attitude is called dualism. Jesus said that such an attitude is the opposite of true love. Therefore, is there any one of us who has the pure love Jesus was talking about? If we do not, we should not criticize his teachings or feel that they are irrelevant to us. We are the ones who have misunderstood, perhaps knowing the words of his teachings, but never acting upon them. There are many beautiful sentences in the Bible, but I do not recall reading that Jesus ever said that without your doing anything whatsoever, without preparing yourself in some way, the Holy Spirit will descend upon you, whoosh. If you do not act the way he said you should act, there is no Holy Spirit existent anywhere for you. What I have read in the Bible has the same connotation as the Buddhist teachings on equilibrium, compassion, and changing one's ego attachment into love for others. It may not be immediately obvious how to train your mind to develop these attitudes, but it is certainly possible to do so. Only our selfishness and closed-mindedness prevent us. With true realizations, the mind is no longer egotistically concerned with only its own salvation. With true love, one no longer behaves dualistically, feeling very attached to some people, distant from others, and totally indifferent to the rest. It is so simple. In the ordinary personality, the mind is always divided against itself, always fighting and disturbing its own peace. The teachings on love are very practical. Do not put religion somewhere up in the sky and feel you are stuck down here on earth. If one's actions of body, speech, and mind are in accordance with loving kindness, then you automatically become a truly religious person. To be religious does not mean that you attend certain teachings. If you listen to teachings and misinterpret them, you are, in fact, the opposite of religious. And it is only because you do not understand a certain teaching that you abuse religion. Lack of deep understanding leads to partisanship. The ego feels, I am a Buddhist, therefore Christianity must be all wrong. This is very harmful to true religious feeling. You do not destroy a religion with bombs, but with hatred. More importantly, you destroy the peacefulness of your own mind. It does not matter whether you express your hatred with words or not. Words do not mean anything. The mere thought of hatred automatically destroys your peace. Similarly, true love does not depend on physical expression. You should realize this. True love is a feeling deep within you. It is not just a matter of wearing a smile on your face and looking happy. Rather, it arises from a heartfelt understanding of every other being's suffering and radiates out to all of them indiscriminately. It does not favor a chosen few to the exclusion of everyone else. This is true love. For the Mount Everest Center boys, this was their first Christmas. Mommy Mac shopped for them at the commissary, returning with a Christmas tree, American-style trimmings, and plenty of chocolate goodies. They had lots of fun helping her decorate the tree, which was placed in the new gompa. When Jampa Trinley complained that the gompa contained no statues yet, Lama Yeshe replied, "My monks are my Buddha statues." Jampa Trinley laughed and promptly donated large statues of Lama Tsongkhapa and his 2 disciples. Meanwhile, Geshe Jampa Tekchok, Lama Yeshe's classmate from Sera and Baksa, moved into Steve's tower to do some retreat. Lama Yeshe, Max, and Peter met in the Gompa to plan the rest of the year. A few days earlier, Max had sidled up to me and said that Lama had this new retreat place in Dharamsala, and how nice it would be if I could go there and look after it while I did retreat, said Peter. I thought that sounded very comfortable and made a plan to travel to India in a few days' time. But at this meeting in the Gompa, Lama ordered me to leave immediately, the following day, saying that sentient beings couldn't wait. He was so heavy, and I had absolutely no choice. So by 6 o'clock the next morning, I was on my way.